Richard Boom here. I'm not part of this madness.
Must have been to a higher ground.
Alright guys, let's do this. In this episode, I will try to unpack this needlessly complicated GMO issue. This issue is very close to heart because my former girlfriend was propagandized by these special interest groups and organic industry people that are obviously against GMOs and genetic technology in general. These people, they want you to believe that GMOs are evil, and I bet the vast majority of people buy into this idea that GMOs themselves are the scourge of the world. My former girlfriend and those like her are being used by these people as mindless ideological attack dogs. We can do a lot of wonderful things with GMOs, but without understanding the facts and with the annoyingly touchy-feely wouwou state of society, genetic technology applied on food has no chance of progressing if nobody does the hard task of speaking truth to the mob, if nobody reins in these mindless attack dogs created by special interest groups. We are needlessly hampering a technology that could save millions of lives and the environment. The public is highly emotional and irrational. That's why it doesn't understand GMOs, genetics, nutrition, overall science. The public do not understand science. Nor does the wide public have the intellectual rigor to understand complex topics. This is why they choose an explanation, this good, that bad. Therefore, I go with good and I demonize what's evil. That's how the public thinks. They don't analyze based on self-interest, based on data, based on facts. That's a big, big ask for the mob. The mob, unfortunately, and especially the kids today, the younger generation, mistakes thinking for feeling. This is the problem. The GMO debate is no different. That is why this simple scientific issue became so complicated. And we also have a problem of this GMO issue has been politicized. So once you politicize something, it turns into it turns into shit. Evidence, reason, and logic be damned. This is why I don't do feelings. So enough of this crap before I get lost into my own monologue here. And I want to discuss why I eat GMOs for dinner and why my organic farmer is using pesticides on my salad. Fearmongers and environmental activists play into this public ignorance and fear because that is how they get their funding. So the special interest of these organizations in demonizing and burying genetic technology and GMOs is that they depend on demonizing GMOs for their own survival. For example, the Greenpeace, one of the most vocal anti-GMO groups out there, is receiving 300 million euros in revenue, and that is only in 2014. And of course, they would like to create issues that would further their cause. And if they could get the public to fear GMOs and to see GMOs as a problem and to see the threat for the environment, that's another issue that they could work on and request funding for. So it sort of justifies their existence by demonizing GMOs. And they play into this fear and ignorance of, well, I call them the mob. I don't even call them the public because it's a mob. That's what it is. Or for example, US organic sales is $43 billion as of 2015 and growing. Where do you think their interest lies? And do you think it will benefit them if you tell them that GMOs and organic crops, they're basically the same thing? The only difference is the organic food is, well, 3 or sometimes 10 times more expensive than conventional crops. And there's not much of a difference between them. Do you think that the organic industry, with the 43 billion in sales, would like to hear that or would like you to know that? There is a massive incentive for the organic industry to demonize conventional produce and GMOs. The more people are afraid of GMOs, the more money gets shoveled into the organic industry and anything related to it. I call it the organic apparatus. You have their set of regulators, you have the activist organizations, you have the labs certifying organic produce. You also have groceries, markets, and people are going insane about these organic food. I was about to say organic shit, but anyway, GMOs, the definition of GMO itself, as I've said, once you politicize something and once emotions are involved, everything turns into shit. And that includes the definition of GMO, genetically modified organism. The official definition of a GMO is GMO is a plant, animal, microorganism, or other organism whose genetic makeup has been modified using recombinant DNA methods, also called gene splicing, gene modification, or transgenic technology. Now, that is the official definition, and I want you to pay attention to that, because that definition is very problematic. Can you imagine if CRISPR gets into the scene wherein you're not using those methods that are mentioned in that definition? What you do in CRISPR is you take an organism and you just jumble its own DNA to create new traits. And according to that official definition, that is not a GMO. On the other hand, the mob has their own definition or understanding of what a GMO is. Basically, for the mob, their definition of GMO is GMO? Well, any organism that is deemed evil and is produced by Monsanto and other evil, greedy corporations and their mad scientists is a GMO. Basically, that's how the mob defines them. If they see something that is produced by these quote-unquote evil, greedy corporation that is out to conquer the world, they will call it a GMO. I want to give you a more sane definition of a GMO. A GMO is any organism whose genetic makeup has been intentionally modified by man through genetic technology or through traditional breeding methods. I define it as such because whatever you do once you modify the genetic code that is genetically modified already, whether you do crossbreeding or whether you do transgenic technology, the key word there is intentionally modified by man. Once you have a man or a woman in our politically correct world, once you have a person that has the intent and modified an organism's genetic material with intent, that counts as a GMO. And this natural, organic thing, these are what I call synthetic terms. They mean nothing, basically. Natural means nothing. Having worked in an advertising agency, it's just a marketing way to say this here is healthy. It is used to signal to the customer that what they're buying is wholesome and good because it is quote-unquote natural. It means nothing. I mean, everything is natural. lead, arsenic, and plutonium are also natural. So if I sell you a bag of plutonium and put natural on it, that doesn't mean it will be good for you. It means nothing. And also, the word natural is not regulated. Anybody could just put natural and claim natural without controls or tests or regulation. That's why I'm saying it means nothing. If you think natural is good for you, just think of lead and plutonium. The definition of organic, for me, it's very synthetic because the definition of organic varies from one country to the other or one regulator to the other. Organic food is produced by methods that comply with the standards of organic farming, and that standard varies worldwide. But organic farming in general features practices that strive to cycle resources, promote ecological balance, and conserve biodiversity. All of those nice woo-woo stuff that I think authors need to put there to satisfy our gynocentric BS woo-woo touchy-feely people in society. But it's an artificial term or a synthetic term. It only has real meaning because regulators define it. But what is organic? It's the same as natural. If someone comes up with a bunch of new regulations, then the meaning of organic will change. And depending on who you ask, organic will be different. And you also need to note that there are a bunch of chemicals or pesticides that are allowed in organic farming because these chemicals are quote-unquote natural. And you already know what natural means. Like, for example, when I used to grow herbs, I used neem oil because it's supposed to be natural. But you know what? The label says, don't ingest, harmful if ingested, harmful to the eyes. It also says, use protective clothes when applying or when using. The label tells you it might be toxic, you know. Despite all these websites saying, oh, neem oil is good for you, harmless, and it's good for the skin. I mean, I wouldn't use it on my own skin. Another one that is allowed in organic farming is copper sulfate. Copper sulfate was used in the past as an emetic. It's now considered too toxic to be used for that purpose. You like that on your food? So you see, organic, natural, GMOs, these are all terms that doesn't really have any solid meaning. Well, GMOs has a more solid meaning if you use my sane definition of what a GMO is. But you ask, how are GMOs created? The way I usually discuss it is I explain GMOs through first principles. So we need to understand first the basis of GMOs or genetics before we can even delve into the topic of GMOs. Every known living organism is composed of DNA, deoxyribonucleic acid. Voila. The DNA is the molecule that tells cells how to grow, when to grow, what to become, and basically what to do. DNA looks like two strands that form a double helix, and those strands are further composed of four more simple chemicals or molecules called the nucleotides, which is my acronym when I was in college is GATACA, GTCA. Guanine, thymine, cytosine, and adenine. And depending on the arrangement of these letters, let's call them letters, you create different characteristics. So if you have a sequence of ANT, CG, ANT, CG, the organism will have a certain characteristic that corresponds to that sequence. And if you change that sequence of letters and the pairing of that letters, you will get a different characteristic or an entirely different organism. This is genetics in a nutshell. And sex is nature's way of creating GMOs or doing genetic modification on organisms, because sex is just the mixing of genetic materials from two parents. So when you have sex, you actually want to transfer your genes and mix it with the woman's genes or vice versa. And this mixing creates the variations in nature. And genetic technology is not so much different from that. In the past, we use crossbreeding and artificial selection, aka domestication, to create the varieties or create the characteristics that we want in organisms. Early farmers, for example, our Stone Age ancestors, modified genes or affected the characteristic of the organisms through artificial selection. So they notice certain plants, they grow bigger or they have more yield. So they saved the seeds of those plants and replanted those seeds. So in time, we modified the characteristics of these plants that we are growing. Because if we let only certain plants to reproduce, surely the traits that are not favored will fade into existence. Eventually, people discovered that they could crossbreed plants and control the process instead of just selecting the organisms that gets to be replanted. Examples of these successful breeding is the broccoli, 6th century. There is no wild broccoli because broccoli is completely man-made. It was bred from wild cabbages. So you won't find the broccoli that you know in the wild. Another example of these successful breeding is the orange carrot during the 17th century. Prior to that, carrots were purple and it was turned into orange by Dutch political zealots. And why orange? Well, it's because the man that led the Dutch revolt against Spain is from the House of Orange. His name is Prince William of Orange. That kind of breeding that was used during those early days of GMOs, I should say, is highly inefficient because you have to crossbreed plants and you have to wait which one grows the characteristic that you want. So what we did in the recent past is we used mutation breeding. That is, we used chemical mutagens such as ethyl methanesulfonate. There you go. I had to look up that one. And we also used ionizing radiation to induce mutations in plants. And usually we exposed seeds or mature pollens to these mutagens and to radiation. This is why we have a bunch of organisms that we enjoy eating today. For example, rape seeds, which are the, I should say, ancestors of canola, was exposed to ethyl methanosulfonate, or let's just call it EMS. Those rape seeds were exposed to EMS to increase the oleic acid and reduce the polyunsaturated fats. That is in 1992. Flax seeds were also exposed to EMS to improve the cooking oil quality, and that is in 1991. And through ionizing radiation or atomic breeding or radiation breeding or atomic gardening, that is irradiating seeds or mature pollens with UV rays, X-rays, or gamma rays, we have ruby red grapefruit and white corn. In fact, dwarf high-yield rice was a product of exposing rice to gamma rays. Apples were also exposed to gamma rays to improve skin color. Seedless grapefruit was also exposed to ionizing radiation. All of these foods that have their genes modified through radiation breeding and through crossbreeding are being eaten by humans today, and they are not classified as GMOs. And let me ask you, what is natural about exposing your food to gamma rays and X-rays or to mutagenic chemicals? Is that natural? Is that organic? What is natural or organic about that? If you want organic / natural, whatever that means, or wild varieties of plants because you think that they are better for you, well, think again, because those same plants, their wild counterpart, will not taste as good or will not be as nutritious for you. In fact, they might even be poisonous or harmful for you. For example, wild bananas. They have very thick skin and they have very large seeds. They can cause digestive problems because of the seeds, and they're not sweet. Another one is watermelon. It's basically a fruit full of large seeds, and it's not going to be sweet. Another one, for example, lettuce. Wild lettuce has spiny and itchy hairs, and if you eat that, you can get allergic reactions. And what's healthy about that? Plants, they did not evolve just to be eaten by you. They develop defenses to prevent you from eating them. Plants, they want to reproduce. For example, wild peach is just 23 millimeter versus the 100 millimeter peach that you see in the market. And 36% of that 20 millimeter wild peach is seed. And then trust me, it also won't be sweet because it doesn't care if it is sweet or not. We are the ones who care about the taste. So if you tell me that absolutely natural is good and natural is best, well, think again, because natural or wild or organic doesn't necessarily mean healthy and good compared to GMOs. Now, we go to modern genetic technology, which basically does the same thing. It just mixes genes with the technology that we have. What scientists does is they identify a genetic sequence that they like or produces desirable traits, and they take that and they put it into another organism. So for example, if they identify a gene that produces insecticide naturally in one organism, they will identify the genetic sequence or those letters that correspond to that characteristic and then isolate that genetic sequence, take that genetic sequence and insert it into another organism. So the genetic sequence of that GMO would have a few extra letters. And that is basically what GM technology is. This technology or modifying organisms this way is more accurate and more efficient because you don't have to guess whether this plant will produce viable offsprings or not, or whether the characteristic that you want will come out in the next generation. This way, if you say gene here, you are sure that that plant will exhibit that genes and will produce the desired characteristic that you like. You don't have to guess. And the technology, contrary to a lot of what people believe, GM technology requires a lot of tests, requires a lot of study, requires a lot of money, and there are so much regulation about GMOs before it goes out to the public and before it is used commercially. The result of this is we have now plants that have characteristics that they wouldn't normally have in the wild. For example, we have the BT corn in 1995, which is a corn that produces its own pesticides. People found that BT corn was useful, so later the BT genes were inserted to cotton, soy, potato, and recently to aubergines in India. If these GMOs were so evil and nobody wants it and everybody should hate it, why do you think they would continue to produce it and insert it in other plants given the cost of producing and paying off the regulation for these plants. If people don't use it, it will not create the demand, and the companies won't produce these organisms because they cannot profit from it. In fact, GMOs do not stop with BT corn, BT soy, BT potato, and BT aubergine. In 1998, Hawaii produced a transgenic papaya to save its papaya industry, because you had this widespread ring spot virus spreading from one papaya plantation to the other, and it threatened to make the Hawaiian papaya extinct. In 2004 and 2005, golden rice was produced, and this golden rice produces vitamin A, and the natural rice doesn't do that. The golden rice was meant to save kids from the third world from going blind, because they cannot afford to buy vitamin A supplements, and people in the third world eat a lot of rice. So how are these plants evil and threaten to destroy the world as these fearmongers claim it to be? For example, golden rice actually has more nutrition than ordinary rice. And they're saying, oh, this is evil, and, GMOs are not nutritious for you, it's bad for you. It depends on the GMO. And how are these so-called evil GM plants different from plants produced through crossbreeding? It's the same nucleotides, guanine, thymine, cytosine, and adenine. Given, of course, that you don't create a genetic material that produces poisonous proteins, these GMOs won't do you harm. I could not find the source for this, but let's just say that this is a thought experiment. Only this time it actually happened, and I cannot find the sources. So they once crossbred a lettuce, and the crossbreeding produced a lettuce that has a poison sap on it and prickly hairs that irritated the skin. The sap could actually paralyze you and could even make you blind. And let me ask you, what's healthy about that? Or what's good about that lettuce hybrid? But the thing is, that lettuce hybrid is not considered a GMO under current definitions because it was produced through crossbreeding and not through transgenic technology. How come a typical GMO that is good for you, for example, golden rice, requires a label and a chunk full of regulation, and dangerous crossbreeds could just pass off without control? Golden rice produces vitamin A. A natural rice don't. You could engineer the rice to have better yields as well. This helps people in the first world, but a crossbred lettuce that produces poison sap and has itchy hairs could be considered natural, and if I grow that dangerous poisonous lettuce with organic farming practices, that GMO could pass as natural organic produce when it is poisonous. So what's the problem? The problem with the mob is they're lazy and dumb. They prefer labels instead of intellectual rigor. They don't know science. They don't have objectivity. They mistake feeling for thinking. Feeling is good for sex, not for evaluating facts. What I think people should do is each GMO should be evaluated on a case-per-case basis, not a sweeping label of GMOs. Some of it are good, some of it are bad. Like, for example, I won't eat BT corn, for example, because it produces cryprotein or delta endotoxin, which is, they said, it's an insecticide that affects insect gut. But the thing is, what cryprotein does? It attaches to the gut epithelium and it causes your cell membranes, or at least the insect cell membrane, to break down, and that leads to the death of the insect. I personally would not eat a BT GMO, but I don't mind eating golden rice, for example, or a GM Hawaiian papaya. I think I've even already eaten a GM papaya. The problem of most people is they don't think. They mistake feeling for thinking. They can't differentiate from thoughts and emotions. It's feels over reals. We can't find any sensible conversation about GMOs with the public because the issue has been politicized and GMOs have been demonized, and when you speak of GMOs, it just turns into one big heated argument. They don't understand the technology, and you have fearmongers that benefit from having a fearful and angry mob. It doesn't help if you say that you are implanting virus to introduce new genes to a plant, because these people only understand virus bad, plant good, must eat organic, must eat natural, GM bad. This is what they understand. The mob doesn't know that it's not the GMOs that they hate. Understand this, and if you are part of the mob, pay attention. It is not the GMOs that we should hate. It is the corporations and the possible monopoly on food that we should be paying attention to. The real issue here, or the real fear here, is that a handful of corporations could end up controlling the food supply. And this talk of GMO bad, organic, good, is covering what we should be focusing on. And I repeat, we should be focusing on the individual merits of modified organisms, whether from crossbreeding, quote-unquote natural method, or through genetic technology. We'll need GMOs to feed the population, to colonize Mars, to grow food in space. We'll need GMOs to create better food. Same as how our ancestors domesticated plants and animals. Same as how we bred broccolis, because we like broccolis. Nobody complains about broccolis and carrots, right? So please don't be one of these mindless idiots. Understand the real issue. And I want you to really understand it's not the GMOs that is the real problem. It's the possible control and monopoly on our food supply that we should be worrying and focusing on. These people can put patents on organisms. And what do you think can a corporation and a team of lawyers do with a patent on genes, with a patent on DNA? Think about that. So as always, please like, share, subscribe, and please, if you are in vid.me, please subscribe. I want to have 50 followers so I could verify my account on vidme. Alright? Thank you. See you soon.
You should know.